Good afternoon. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Lewis Lehrman Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on all of these occasions on our heritage.org website. I would ask everyone here in-house to make that last courtesy check about cell phones and seeing that they're turned off as we begin. It's always appreciated. We will post the program on the Heritage homepage for everyone's future reference, and of course our internet viewers are welcome at any time to send questions or comments, simply emailing us at speaker@heritage.org. Hosting our guest this afternoon is Bruce Klingner, our Senior Research Fellow for Northeast Asia in the Asian Studies Center. He has 20 years' experience in the intelligence community, working at the CIA and Defense Intelligence Agency. From 1996 to 2001, he was the Deputy Chief of the Korean Issue Group in the CIA's Directorate of Intelligence. Before joining us here at Heritage, he spent several years at the Eurasia Group, where he served as their primary Korean analyst. And previous to that, he worked as Director of Analysis and Senior Asian Analyst at the IntelliBridge Corporation. Please join me in welcoming my colleague, Bruce Klingner. Bruce?
Thank you, John. Two common refrains that we often hear when people focus on human rights are, "Had we only known," and "never again." And the world, it seems, periodically rediscovers North Korean human rights violations when another report or another book is published describing the depravity of the North Korean regime and its political prisons. But there are also countless reports of what life is like in the rest of North Korea, outside of the camps. And really, I think the only conclusion we can come to is that the entire country is one big political prison with 22 million inmates. And the UN Commission of Inquiry recently issued a very damning condemnation of the North Korean government for, quote, "systemic, widespread, and gross violations of human rights of such monumental scale as to constitute crimes against humanity," end quote. Now, particularly after that COI report, the world cannot escape the reality that we know. We know of the horrendous conditions within North Korea. We know of the political prisons. We know of the murders, of the tortures, of the rapes, of the forced abortions, of the regime knowingly causing prolonged starvation. The list goes on. And one wonders really, where is the world outrage? Where are the well-publicized protests by Hollywood stars who so eagerly protest wrongdoings elsewhere? And where are the global calls for sanctions such as those against apartheid South Africa? And indeed, where is the U.S. government? U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, while she was a private citizen, harshly criticized the Clinton administration's inaction against the Rwandan genocide. Yet she has been remarkably quiet, as has the Obama administration, about North Korean human rights abuses even after the COI report. And one wonders if perhaps a future author will write about the Obama administration what she wrote about the Clinton administration, that the real reason the U.S. did not do what it could and should have done to stop genocide was not a lack of knowledge or influence, but a lack of will. Simply put, American leaders did not act because they did not want to. And the world always stridently declares never again, as if some resolute declaration and pledge for the future justifies inaction to the compiled evidence of atrocities. UN Commission Chair Michael Kirby, an eloquent and passionate advocate for the North Korean people, implored, "Now is the time for action. We can't say we didn't know. The suffering and tears of the people of North Korea demand action. Our generation must tackle this issue urgently and collectively. The rest of the world has ignored the evidence for too long," he continued. "Now there is no excuse because now we know. The world is now better informed about North Korea, and the world is watching. It will judge us by our response. It is now your duty to address the scourge of human rights violations and crimes against humanity in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea." To address this critical international issue, we are truly honored to host Ambassador Jung-hoon, the Republic of Korea's Ambassador for Human Rights. Ambassador Yi is also the Director for the Center of Modern Korean Studies and Center for American Studies at Yonsei University, serves as a senior member of South Korea's National Unification Advisory Council, chairs the Advisory Committee for Humanitarian Affairs, the Ministry of Unification, and many other duties, apparently he never sleeps. So with great pleasure and great honor, please join me in welcoming Ambassador Yi.
Well, thank you, Bruce. I was getting quite comfortable down there listening to your excellent introductory remarks. It really gives me great pleasure to be here at the Heritage Foundation. I'm going to be talking about the North Korean human rights issue today, and I think it resonates with one of the founding principles of the Heritage Foundation, which of course is the individual freedom, which there's none in North Korea. I came here yesterday to participate in the hearing on the North Korean human rights organized by Representative Chris Smith, who is the chairperson of the House Subcommittee. So it's part of the Foreign Relations Committee. Subcommittee, it's a long name, on Africa, global health, global human rights, and also international organization. Because I represent my government, it's not a testimony that I gave, but a briefing. So I gave a briefing on the North Korean human rights situations. And I also have recently, actually in January this year, founded in Korea a Human Liberty Center, which focuses on a couple of things. Number one, making short videos for YouTube, because my purpose is to advertise this issue as much as possible. The second part of the Human Liberty Center is linking with international organizations, international law firms, and we commissioned a major law firm in London called Hogan Lovells, who's recently come up with almost 100-page sort of second opinion, if you will, on the COI report. And I will talk about that as well. In 1945, at the end of the Second World War, the world was really shocked, repulsed at some of the war crimes that we've seen during the war, and also inhumane activities or acts against particularly the civilian population. Especially what happened in Auschwitz, Treblinka, and other concentration camps. I mean, these were just unacceptable. And therefore, after the war, we have the Nuremberg trials, and we have the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. And these two, the Nuremberg trial and the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I mean, these two would stand very tall as twin towers of a lot of the post-1945 human rights activities in the global context. In fact, I would say that Nuremberg and the Declaration, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, put human rights on the global map. Human rights was on the agenda of international politics. This will be followed up with things like international covenants on human rights, making it a law, and other instruments will be adopted as well. Sanctions will be placed, sometimes even armed interventions. Steps were taken against regimes that will violate the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I think you all know about what happened with the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. We know of the genocide in Rwanda, the apartheid system in South Africa. These are just cases in point of what the international community did with some of these regimes that violated the principles of human rights in the global context. What is really mind-boggling is how, arguably, the most vicious and the worst violator of human rights today, North Korea, has so successfully escaped the scrutiny of international regime of human rights. Not only were there no sanctions or interventions, there are sanctions, UN Security Council resolutions, economic sanctions on North Korea. There are 4 now. But those are for North Korea's weapons of mass destruction. 3 for the nuclear tests. I think you all know that North Korea has already had 3 nuclear tests. 1 resolution is for the long-range missile, launching of the long-range missile. So we have 4 sanctions, but none on North Korean human rights violations. Over 20 million people languish under 7 decades. I mean, count the number, that's almost 70 years of tyranny of the Kim dynasty. 3 generations of tyranny. And this is most unusual because when we see human rights violations in other parts, it may result from civil war, it may result from some kind of revolution or civil disobedience or uprising. It may last a couple of years, maybe 5 or 6 years, but rarely do you see a circumstance where things like this persistently and continuously go on, perpetrated by the state itself for as long as it has in North Korea, 7 decades. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights has 30 articles. North Korea violates every single one of them. There's not one human rights that North Korea upholds. Recently, the world was shocked at how summarily Jang Song-taek was executed. Jang Song-taek, of course, we know as the uncle of Kim Jong-un, husband to the woman who is the daughter of Kim Il-sung and sister of Kim Jong-il. He's the number 2 guy in North Korea. He's cream of the crop. One of the leadership, one of the culprits responsible for human rights violations, but he was summoned and executed for challenging Kim Jong-un. Rumor has it that he was machine gunned down, 90 rounds, and that was not enough. So flamethrower was used to get rid of whatever might have remained. That sounds astounding, unbelievable. No. People are just saying that. Okay? It just seems so surreal. Can't happen. Of course, as we sit here, that it just doesn't sound real. But in North Korea, this is not an uncommon thing. Just in March of 2013, Kim Chol, who is the vice minister of the Ministry of the People's Armed Forces, was executed by mortal bomb explosion. Why? Because he was drinking during the mourning period, mourning for the death of Kim Jong-il. So this is not an uncommon thing. But when people heard this, it was shocking. Jang Song-taek, people were thinking he's the real power behind Kim Jong-un. And then he will be so swiftly executed. Human rights violations. Ironic. I bring this up. My point is, if you can do that to the number 2 guy in North Korea, the most powerful person in North Korea. Can you imagine what they would do to just normal people, peasants? They will be treated like dirt. Their life really doesn't mean much. That's the state of North Korea. Lots of purging going on in North Korea. I mean, Jang Song-taek is just one of them. You may remember when Kim Jong-il died, there was, in the funeral proceedings, his coffin will be carried in this car, and there were 8 people, 8 top elites of the North Korean society would be escorting that car. One of the 8, of course, is Kim Jong-un. So the other 7, of the other 7, 5 have already been purged. One of those 5, of course, is Jang Song-taek. So it just gives you a sense of what a scary society North Korea is. Of course, this is a legacy. Kim Jong-il did it. Widespread purging. Now, purging doesn't necessarily mean that you're executed. You may be executed, you may not. You may be sent to political prison camps. Kim Il-sung did it. He purged every single faction that might have been in competition for power as he rose up the strata. And exactly this is what's happening as well with Kim Jong-un. When Kim Jong-il died and Kim Jong-un rose, there were, in some quarters, not me, but in some quarters, some hope that maybe things might turn better, for the better. Kim Jong-un, after all, was educated in Switzerland. He likes NBA. Apparently the wrong NBA player that he keeps inviting over. I don't know if he's a good representation of the NBA or the United States. In any case, there were some hope that maybe things might get better. That he's young, he's exposed to the Western way of life. Things might get better, but they haven't. In fact, I would argue that it might have gotten even worse, because if you recall, last year, for the most part of the first half of last year, 2013, almost every other day, we would have some kind of provocation from North Korea, all sorts of provocations. This year, right now, it's a little bit quiet, but I think you'll recall that earlier this year, there were speculations of 4th nuclear test. I think it will still happen. In fact, I have no doubt that it will happen. It's just a question of when. Political prison camps haven't shut down. They're alive and kicking. North Korean refugees continue to flow out, but unfortunately, under Kim Jong-un, the border, the border security has gotten even worse. That, in fact, for the past 2 years, the North Koreans trying to defect North Korea into China have halved. Only about 50% now cross over. We should also keep in mind that 70 to 80% of North Koreans who are seeking refuge in China and elsewhere are women and children. The international community has been, for the past 10 years in particular, trying to send a message to North Korea. In your country, in the United States, in 2004, you have the North Korean human rights law, as which you have the North Korean human rights ambassador, Robert King. In 2006, Japan also followed suit by enacting North Korean human rights law. Although in Japan, it's very much focused on the Japanese kidnapped citizens. 2007, EU, European Union, also followed suit with North Korean human rights resolution. United Nations has been doing this. Every year they adopt the resolution for the past 10 years. And in fact, 2012 and 2013, North Korea, the United Nations, the Human Rights Council adopted North Korean human rights resolution under consensus, meaning no vote. This year, there was a vote. Okay, for 2 years, it was a consensus, but this year they took a vote because of the release of the COI report. In March, the Commission of Inquiry on North Korea investigating human rights violations, Michael Kirby, a justice from Australia, released formally the ending of the report and also recommendations to the United Nations as to these are things that ought to be done. And therefore, some countries opposed that and vote was forced. But still a resounding victory because 30 votes in favor of the resolution and 6 votes against. And the 6 countries that voted against the resolution and obviously opposing the COI, I mean, it's not a particularly nice group, if you will. I mean, no offense, but China, Russia, usual suspect. And then who do you have? Cuba, Venezuela. Unfortunate, but Vietnam was there too. Pakistan. But Pakistan probably more because just the day before, there was a vote on drone strikes, U.S. drone strikes in Pakistan, and South Korea voted with the United States. So this is sort of like a retaliation, if you will. I don't know how much you can abet that, but that's what I heard from the Korean ambassador in Pakistan, because I raised issue with him. Hey, why why did Pakistan vote against this? In any case, the COI report, which I consider to be a significant milestone in dealing with the North Korean human rights issues. Justice Kirby, chairman, talks about what's happening in North Korea as unspeakable atrocities by totalitarian regime. Totalitarian regime meaning that it's not just your behavior or what you do is limited. They get into your head. The state gets into how you think. It's a totalitarian state. No parallel in contemporary world. That's what Michael Kirby said. No parallel in contemporary world. What's going on in North Korea? Crimes entailing extermination, murder, enslavement, torture, imprisonment, rape, forced abortion, infanticide, sexual violence, kidnapping, persecutions on religious, race, political, gender grounds, on and on and on. Michael Kirby also sent a letter to Kim Jong-un warning him that he means business and that this will be put to the ICC, International Criminal Court. The key finding, really, the 400 very, very comprehensive report. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to read, at least in part, some part of the COI report. It's very long, but it's a fantastic work that they've done within just a year's period. The key, of course, is that the COI report's finding is that there's crimes against humanity being committed in North Korea. When there's crimes against humanity, there's no time limit. It's like after World War II, those Nazi criminals, war criminals, hiding away in Latin America or elsewhere, 30 years, 40 years down the line. If you find them, they can still be tried, prosecuted. That's what crimes against humanity is. No time limit. There will be prosecution. The recommendation by the COI to the North Koreans, reform. It's calling for legal system reform, closing down the political prison camps, freedom for press, religion, so on and so forth. But when you really look at it, these are things that's not going to happen in North Korea. My understanding of this call for or recommendation for reform is that I believe that the COI team has come to the conclusion that we cannot really deal with this regime as it stands. That if we really want an improvement in human rights conditions in North Korea, there has to be a different regime. Because what it's recommending, basically, I mean, if all these recommended things can take place, then we have no problem. Right? We can live with Kim Jong-un. But it's not going to happen. So basically, I believe it's calling for regime change. That's my interpretation. It also recommends to the United Nations and the international community that the UN Security Council should make a referral to the ICC, International Criminal Court. Because North Korea, of course, is not a statute to the Roman statute, member of the Roman statute, signatory. It also calls for, if not ICC, ad hoc tribunal. It also calls for R2P, responsibility to protect, the international community, the United Nations responsibility to act, intervene on behalf of the people of North Korea because the state is not able to provide the protection. It also called for the establishment of the field office structure, which will be established in Korea. We've accepted my government, South Korean government, accepted the UN's call for the field office to be established in Korea, and that's going to be a huge move as we move forward in dealing with North Korean human rights issue. It also calls for the Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, to maybe be a little more active in terms of the rights up front, sort of preventive actions of human rights violations. The COI effect, what has it done in such a short several months? Well, for one thing, Botswana, for example, immediately after 40 years of diplomatic relations with North Korea, severed their diplomatic relations. We're not going to have diplomatic relations with a country that commits crimes against humanity. Hopefully, there may be more that follows Botswana. I've mentioned about field base, field office. I think that's going to be a tremendous psychological boost in dealing with North Korea, perhaps to the extent that the West German in West Germany, before the unification of Germany, you had the registry that kept track of East German human rights violations. In the end, there were 40,000 cases of human rights violations that was registered in West Germany. We hope that that's the kind of effect this will have. We held the UN Security Council had the ARIA formula meeting, which is an informal meeting, but still, of the 15 members of the Security Council, 13 showed up. 2 didn't. Well, obviously they were Russia again and China. And of those 13, 9 agreed that we should refer this to ICC. And the remaining 4 were not against it. They just didn't vote. One of your congressmen, Ed Royce, is now working on a new enactment on North Korea that targets the secondary boycott. If enacted, that's going to have a very stifling effect on North Korea's commerce. I've mentioned about the Human Liberty Center that I've established in Korea at Yonsei University, and the commissioned work by Hogan Lovells, A Second Opinion on the COI. What the Hogan Lovells report concludes is that it unequivocally endorses the findings and recommendations of the COI. And the Hogan Lovells goes a step further by saying that North Korea is guilty of genocide. COI does not go to that extent. Crimes against humanity. Now, genocide is a very narrow define. And COI, because of the time limit, they didn't want to get into that sort of legal argument as to does it qualify as genocide or not. The COI team felt that crimes against humanity is sufficient. But the Hogan Lovells felt that there are grounds that warrant genocide application to the North Korean case. And I'll give you 3 reasons why Hogan Lovells did that. In order for there to be genocide, there has to be a clear intention by the regime to systematically destruction, or extinguish in whole or in part racial, religious, ethnic, or national groups. It could mean killing them. It could mean psychological or physical damages, prevention of birth, forcible transfer of children, etc., etc. Does it apply to North Korea? We believe that it does, for 3 reasons, or 3 groups are identified. First group is the so-called hostile class. I'm talking about hostile meaning hostility to the regime. This group is considered to be hostile to the Pyongyang regime. This is where the 성분 system comes in. 출신 성분. You're born into this caste. From the birth, you are a certain class, if you will. A caste system that's considered to be hostile. The hostiles, whose state loyalty, their loyalty to the state is suspect because their grandfather maybe did some business in South Korea, or mother was educated in Japan, or whatever it may be. And this hostile class will be placed at the very bottom of the society. North Korea officially creates this group with separate cultural identity, constituting a distinct ethnicity, if you will. Deprivation of food to this particular distinct group. Therefore, it concludes that genocide by attrition or starvation to this particular group is germane to the definition of genocide. The second group is a little more straightforward. Christians, religious group, Christians. Christianity or Christians are a threat to Pyongyang regime, and it is not permitted. There are 2 churches, but it's just a showcase. It's not real church, showcase to the outside world. It counters the state ideology of 주체, self-reliance. Recently, I think you know that one of your citizens, Jeffrey Fowles, U.S. tourist, was detained because he left a Bible in his hotel room. Earlier, 33 North Koreans who have worked with a South Korean Baptist missionary called Kim Jong-un, was sentenced to death for their activities in trying to establish underground churches in North Korea. On November 3rd last year, all of them were executed publicly across 7 cities in front of people, thousands of people who were forced to watch this public execution. Michael Kirby, in talking about crimes against humanity, to quote him, and I think Bruce was earlier talking about this as well, our generation must tackle urgently and collectively. Rest of the world ignored the evidence for too long. Now there's no excuse, because now we know. So the question is, now we know. We can't say, oh, I didn't know. Now we know what's going on. This is UN report. It's not, just some paper that's produced by some students. No, this is a UN report. 400 pages. We know what's going on. So what are we going to do about it? That's the question as we move forward. How can we provide beacon of hope for these people who are yearning for freedom? I think the first and foremost thing that we all must have is the courage and the political will to confront the Pyongyang regime. This regime is very good at extortion, threat, blackmail. It kidnaps people. Sometimes it seems like it's coming around, that it might be giving up its nuclear weapons, and then it turns around, another nuclear test. It cannot be trusted. So one has to have the resolve and the courage and the political will that no matter what, at least this universal value, human rights, is something that we're going to stick to. We're not going to waver on this issue. That's very, very important. There has to be a worldwide mobilization in dealing with the North Korean human rights issue. For example, a global campaign like the one we've seen with the anti-apartheid movement in the 1980s. I remember in your country, in America, the university campuses, students would demonstrate to boycott any products that might be produced from companies that does business or have invested in South Africa. Nestle, for example. This is the kind of campaign, global campaign, that's necessary to continue to put the pressure not only on North Korea, but perhaps on those companies, banks that deal with North Korea, particularly in China. Speaking of which, it's very, very important. Another aspect when it comes to what can we do? We have to find a way to convince China. China holds the key, whether we like it or not. Okay? North Korea is heavily dependent on food, energy, electricity, security on China. So what's the point of having all sorts of resolutions and sanctions on North Korea when China continues to have economic relations? Allow North Korean financial activities to go through the Chinese banks. It's just not going to work. So we have to find a way to convince China that this is not in the best interest of China, China's national interest. China wants to be a G2. China wants to be world leader. And it's not going to get there by being a patron to a rogue state by supporting a country that violates human rights and commits genocide and crime. And finally, what can we do? I think the ultimate solution has to be the reunification of Korea. That really is the ultimate solution. President Park Geun-hye of South Korea has focused on this issue, the reunification. It's been about a year and a half since her tenure. She came in with the sort of doctrine that focuses on trust building, trust process. Let's build trust as we move towards reunification. She's always, in dealing with inter-Korean relations, the end state has been reunification. That's the vision. She's talked about unification bonanza. Recently, in her visit to Germany, in Dresden, she made a Dresden Declaration calling for humanitarian cooperation, setting up infrastructures for joint prosperity, people-to-people expansion of relations. All of these for what? Reunification of Korea. How? Well, in accordance with South Korea's constitution. Article 4 of South Korea's constitution very clearly states that reunification of the Korean peninsula has to be based on liberal democracy. Anything else, I would argue, is unconstitutional. There's no third way. In Korea anyways, I don't know about your country, but in Korea, there's a lot of misconception, misunderstanding about how German unification took place. Some people think that, German unification we should benchmark German unification. It should be our model. It's a successful case of democracy, democratic government on the one hand, and communist government on the other hand. They've successfully negotiated to create one Germany. Of course, that's not the case. I think you all know, right? Chancellor Kohl, and the Christian Democratic Party, until the very end, stuck with the policy of democratization first, negotiation after. No matter what, the Christian Democratic Party, the West German government refused to negotiate with the Communist Party, and Communist Party eventually collapsed. And only then there were negotiations for reunification. So it's really democracy versus democracy. And that's what has to happen. In Korea also, sure, we can have inter-Korean relations. Sure, there can be many other aspects. But on this issue of human rights and democracy, of course, democratization goes hand in hand. This is something that we have to constantly focus on, constantly drum on. Whether inter-Korean relations is good or bad, doesn't matter. We should constantly focus on this issue and demand this. When things seem to get a little better, maybe we set up a joint Olympic team, soccer team. Things are going well, so maybe we shouldn't focus so much on the human rights. Things will never improve in such a case. This is very, very important. Unfortunately, there are some elements in South Korea. I'm almost embarrassed to say that in South Korea, despite the international community's efforts to deal with North Korean human rights, in South Korea, our Congress, I attended the US congressional hearing yesterday, but in South Korea, we still don't have North Korean Human Rights Act because the opposition has opposed the passing of it. What's the point? North Korea is not going to listen anyways. We're only going to provoke North Korea. If you provoke North Korea, how are we going to have better inter-Korean relations? Isn't that really ultimately what we want? Better inter-Korean relations? I think this is wrong angle to approach the North Korean issue. We've tried that. I think you probably heard of the Sunshine Policy, where billions of dollars were poured into North Korea, hoping that North Korea would change. Did it? What did we get back in return? Nuclear tests. Did we get any improvement in human rights conditions? Absolutely not. Got worse and worse. Maybe it helped the conditions, of the ruling elite to buy better cognacs or better yachts. Who knows? The luxury items. But that hasn't happened at all. So unfortunately, South Korean society is polarized. The politics is polarized. But this is why international public opinion plays such an important role. That it has to be, the awareness has to be raised, and if and when there's sufficient international public opinion, I believe that even in China, even today in China, the netizens, the younger generations, they're beginning to raise questions. Why is our Beijing government, continuing to support this terrible North Korean regime? Isn't it to our detriment of our national interest? Isn't it kind of embarrassing? It is being raised. That's why I think it falls on all of us to continue to raise the issue, increase the awareness of what is going on in North Korea. In Africa, in other parts, there are some clear images of human rights violations. Like in Africa, for example, famine, and you have these little kids with bloated stomach from hunger, flies flying around. Very, very powerful images that get stuck in our head. So our hearts go to them. In North Korea, unfortunately, we have no pictures. That's how closed up the society is. Nobody can go into the political prison camps and take pictures of what's going on in there. Or take video, take movie camera and take videos. But just because we don't have them doesn't mean that it's not happening. But because we don't see it, it's very difficult to picture that in our head. But believe me, it is happening, and a lot worse than what we may think. So I hope, I'm very grateful that all of you have showed up, and I hope some of you may already be very much involved in North Korean human rights issues. If you are, please continue. And if you aren't, I hope you will take serious interest, because every day that we pass by is another day of tremendous suffering by the people of North Korea, in particular women and children. And on that note, I will end. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Are you willing to take some questions?
Sure, of course.
Okay. Why don't we, actually, let me ask the first one. I had a list of questions, but you already had answered most of them. But if I could focus a bit on a South Korean Human Rights Act on North Korea, is earlier this year, it had looked like the opposition was moving towards agreement. What seems to be the biggest impediment, toward what would have been a resolution of it? They had appeared to be agreeing with the ruling party's push, but then backed away. Is it all political, or is it just a very strong differences of view of what the approach should be towards North Korea?
Yeah, it is precisely that. It is political and it is ideological. Basically, the opposition party does not want to call it human rights law. They want to call it humanitarian law. They feel that, as I was telling you earlier, why are we meddling in the internal affairs of North Korea? Especially when it's not going to have any positive effect. Why do we provoke North Korea? shouldn't we try to alleviate the human rights conditions by providing humanitarian aid? That's the opposition's sort of take on this issue. And they want to add on sort of human rights / humanitarian law. But I think the humanitarian aspect is only being, put forward to somehow force or deter the Human Rights Act from taking shape. There were some hope, and it came out of the sort of like international momentum that was created with the coming out of the COI report. So there was pressure. Even the opposition party felt pressure that maybe, they have to do something about this. So it appeared that they might be, coming to the middle a little bit to come to some kind of an agreement, but they sort of weathered the storm. And then, of course, you probably all know about the Sewol tragedy of one of our ferries being sunk, and a lot of unfortunate death. And with that, all these issues just evaporated, if you will. So I don't think it's going to happen this year, maybe not even next year. So we move forward, and the opposition talk as if by providing humanitarian assistance that it would, it could lead to an improvement in human rights, that it could lead to North Korea somehow being convinced to give up its nuclear weapons. It's just the opposite. So I'm very pessimistic on that department, and it's embarrassing. Yeah.
Right down here, we've got two. Start with
Hi, Brad Harris, HRNK. Thank you for your great speech. I wanted to ask a little bit, you mentioned the anti-apartheid movement as a model. And it's my understanding that the anti-apartheid movement succeeded in large part because it bolstered the stand-in of leaders like Helen Suzman and Nelson Mandela, and it influenced independent institutions such as the Dutch Reformed Church and the business community in South Africa. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the mechanisms of influence that a similar campaign for North Korean human rights could have.
Yeah, I mean, you draw on excellent points, and there are lots of differences, and it would not be right to compare straightforward South Africa in the case of North Korea, because we don't have Nestle in North Korea. It's not like North Korea is very heavily engaged in commercial activities. So it's very difficult to target that could hurt North Korea. But I will give you one example. South Africa was not permitted to participate in any international sporting events. And South Africa is a very big sporting powerhouse in rugby, cricket, football maybe? I don't know, maybe some South African here. With North Korea, it seems like we're almost like hoping that North Korea would somehow participate, maybe create joint teams in basketball or what have you, so that it gives the air that there's improvement in sporting, cultural aspects, in inter-Korean relations. It's all facade, right? And it doesn't really add to anything. There's no purpose to all this, right? So one has to have a very stringent and strict principle and we have to prioritize what is important. Are we going to put priority on human rights conditions improvement? After all, UN says that there's crimes against humanity. Others say that there's genocide. So here's a country that's committing crimes against humanity, genocide going on, and we're going to put on happy face to put up a joint soccer team as if this human rights violation is not taking place. That's ludicrous. So I think at least in that department we can do that. Commercially, it's of course much smaller in size than South Africa, but still, North Korea through, I mean, they don't use North Korean names. They would use Chinese names or other pseudonyms for bank commercial activities in China. China knows that. They know which banks, which transactions are North Korea related. So international community has to somehow find ways to convince China to block these off. And the herding effect will be similar, however, unproportionate it may be. But very good point.
Hi, I'm Olivia Enos from the Heritage Foundation. Thank you for your remarks. I have two questions. One, with the findings of the Hogan-Lovells report, basically saying that North Korea committed genocide, I know that there are some pretty significant legal and tangible ramifications for that, and I was wondering if you could kind of elucidate those a little bit more. And also, kind of coming off of that, do you think that there's a chance that the UN might look into genocide being committed in North Korea and give a little bit more credence to that and maybe do a even larger investigation with the findings of this report?
Okay, probably not right away. Yeah, I will be very happy if they take into serious considerations the crimes against humanity. Okay, the COI felt that, well, we can get into genocide, but it's a real legal, theoretical, how should I say, complication that will take a long time to try to fit North Korea into that billing. So they said, okay, let's put that off for another day. For now, crimes against humanity is enough. Okay, so I hope that the United Nations, particularly in the General Assembly coming up in fall, will take this issue seriously and kick off the prosecutory mechanism, which of course was in the final resolution at the UN Human Rights Council in March. We were hoping that maybe they would put in the word ICC, but they shied away from it and instead put in the word prosecutory mechanism. UN is it's a great place in one way, but it's also very, well, personally I think it's a very sometimes overly diplomatic place, so it takes a lot of patience. There's a lot of sort of build-up to get things done, and you just have to be patient. Especially in the Security Council issue, I mean, the one veto, after all these years, we still maintain that system. So, therein lies a UN reform issue, which I'm not going to get into. But, this is a post-World War II system that we still adhere to. In this day and age, that one country should have so much omnipotence it's beyond me, But we have to deal with it because that's the system, But genocide itself, I don't think it will be taken up right away. But you do know that we have the genocide the convention, and by raising this, the Hogan-Lovells and the human liberty will be. We're not the first, but we are. Yesterday at the hearing, I also introduced this, and we have the documents. And I hope it's the beginning of a long list of further studies so that genocide is added on to the crimes against humanity. What is the difference between the two? I think it's the impact factor of when two of them are combined, it will be very difficult, even for China. I mean, they can veto once or twice, but if it keeps coming up on issues like genocide, it just doesn't look good on China, right? So the important thing is for the Security Council members to keep putting it up and let China veto if it wants to. After a while, I think it will feel increasingly more pressure to maybe at least abstain. And that's what we are hoping for. You should remember that Russia has been very has used its veto power very often. China, no. Only very recently with Syria, used the veto power. That was only the 10th. So it's very judicious with its veto power. So we're hoping that it will be judicious with North Korean human rights issue as well.
One right down here in front.
Young-chan Kim from HNK.
Just wait for the mic. Thank you.
You mentioned about ironical conflicts between the notion of humanitarian and human rights in Korean domestic politics. And as I remember President Park at the Dresden statement, she emphasized about resuming humanitarian assistance to North Korea for the most vulnerable classes. But as far as I remember, there was no government that was successfully managed between humanitarian assistance and maintaining great relations with North Korea and pursuing human right, fighting for human rights in North Korea. What is exact South Korean government's position in North Korean human rights issues? Because as far as I know, there was much focus on humanitarian assistance, resuming humanitarian assistance, and recovering inter-Korean relationship, but there hasn't been so much emphasis on human rights issues in North Korea, as far as I remember. So, as an ambassador, can you tell us more about South Korean government's position on human rights issues and the further steps?
Again, good question. In Dresden, President Park, what she was talking about in terms of humanitarian assistance, she placed focus on what is called the 모자 package 1,000. It means mother and child package 1,000. 1,000 in reference to first 1,000 days of child rearing. That's very important that that child in that first, I guess, 3 years is well fed because the nourishment affects the proper development of your brain and physique and all that. And so she hopes to be able to provide to this group. But again, it's not an easy task because how do you identify? I mean, every child born in North Korea that South Korea is going to support in one way or another. We probably don't do that even in South Korea. Right. So, but she means well by that somehow in South Korea, humanitarian assistance and good inter-Korean relations is the politically correct thing to do, no matter what. Right. So, politicians, particularly in the National Assembly, tend to take a very moderate position on these issues, and when you talk about human rights issues, you're readily labeled as ultra-conservative, as I am often. but I think I'm just sticking. Where's the left and where's the right on human rights issue? I mean, human rights should not be politicized. Human rights is human rights. There's nothing more, nothing less to it. But unfortunately, it has become politicized. Now, the Park Geun-hye government's decision to host the field office structure in South Korea is a step forward. It's a big step forward. Believe me when I say there were opposition, even within the government, certainly in the National Assembly. You've heard what Kim Jong-un said about field office being held, established in Korea. He's throwing out all sorts of threats. Anyone related with this field office, you're gonna pay, right? I'm not scared, right? But why is he threatening? Obviously, he doesn't want this, which means that there's some use to this, right? He's scared. Right? He doesn't want what he does wrong to be registered, to be kept in record. You know what the central registry in West Germany did? When East Germans tried to escape across the wall and border, and they used to like fire at them. But once they started, recording and keeping track, it's a very strong deterrent. North Koreans, hopefully, when we start doing that, will think twice before they beat up on a child or execute someone, because we will remember that. We will keep track of who's doing it, because I don't know when the reunification will take place, but 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line, we will remember, and we will prosecute it. When I say we, South Korea doesn't even have to do that. North Koreans will do that. Okay? The ones, the victims, they will not stand idly by. From South Korea's point of view, we have to prepare for the days of unification, and when that day comes, I hope we South Koreans can feel, how should I say, can feel justified or unashamed to the North Koreans that we did our best. So we have to ask that question: are we doing our best? Are we saying the right things now? Because it could come back and haunt us some 5 years down when we're reunified. North Koreans are going to tell us, what did you guys do back then when we were suffering under the tyranny? So we have to think about that. Yes.
피터 강 코리안 프리덤 얼라이언스, 한국말로는 한미 자유 연맹이라 그럽니다.
네.
애국 총연맹하고 조금 다른 거고요. I have a question about. I think you said that a lot of people said this too. We should persuade China to influence North Korea, but China knows what to do. China decides right now. China doesn't have good relation because North Korea, executed Jang Sung-taek and then threatening fourth nuclear test and so on. So China knows what to do with him. How do we persuade China? I mean, how do we teach them what is right? Can you do that?
I don't think we can teach China. But China, I believe, Chinese are very pragmatic. Okay? Chinese are. They are weighing, measuring costs and benefits to Chinese national interest. Right now, unfortunately, China probably believes that it's still more beneficial to China to keep North Korea and support it as such, maybe as a pawn in dealing with the United States in the hegemonic battle in the Asia Pacific. China may be still trapped in the Cold War mentality in that sense. But I think we have to continue to persuade China that reunification under South Korean terms will have a tremendous spillover effect economically and security also to China's 3 northeast provinces, okay, which of course is one of the very important projects going forward to China. Chinese growth rate is still high, but it is dropping. So if there's reunification on the Korean Peninsula, if there's no security threat on the Korean Peninsula, and with reunified Korean Peninsula, our Samsungs and Hyundais or what have you, starts going into the 3 provinces, northeast provinces of China, I think that could trigger and initiate a second economic takeoff of China, tremendously boosting Chinese economy for the next decades. And I think that's the kind of selling point that we have to come up with. That's for the economists to figure out. I'm not an economist, so I don't want to elaborate on that. But I don't know. I mean, it's a really tough question that that we all try to come up with what's best. But I think that's really, we have to figure out what China wants and try to cater to that. And I believe that economics commerce economics is the area that we must target because we can't compromise security.
Renee Doyle, Legislative Director for Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann. I have a question. You said that the state gets into how you think in a totalitarian state, and you also talked about how it was an aggravation to the North Koreans when South Korea agreed to set up a field office. Now that would be interrupting the way that they have programmed people to think, so that is definitely an inroad, right? I mean, that really does touch, I guess, at the very heart.
Yeah.
I mean, that does make a difference. So would it not, you said that so far, there's just a lot of political pushback in some type of amendment, that a human rights amendment. What I want to know is, have you received any, has South Korea received any encouragement from around the world regarding putting forth that? You said they're hesitant to do that because they think they'd be poking the bear, if you will, that it would not do them any good. They saw the reaction to the field office agreement. So is there anything coming from the United Nations, is there anything coming from the U.S. to encourage them in that direction?
Encourage South Korea?
Yes.
I mean, certainly the UN Human Rights Council was hoping that it will be established in South Korea. There were alternative sites. Japan was raised a little bit. Thailand, because of the presence of ESCOS already in Thailand, so that was a viable alternative. But at the end of the day, it will be highly not very pragmatic, because these people would constantly have to come to Korea because they're going to basically be interviewing North Korean refugees, defectors, and they do that in Korea. So it will be silly to have the office, field office in somewhere else, whilst they're doing most of the work here in Korea. Yeah, so it just makes logical sense that it's in Korea. So I don't know if U.S. Played a role on this, but certainly from the UN standpoint, they were hoping that South Korea would be the country hosting this, and they did request for this, which we've of course accepted. But as I was saying, there were quarters in the South Korean government and the society that was not in favor of doing that.
You addressed the human rights amendment.
You mean the North Korean human rights law?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the hesitation.
Yes.
That's what I was saying is the field office, the suggestion that they would entertain a field office there immediately provoked North Korea. Okay, so it did resonate. So what about moving forward on the human rights law? That's what I'm just saying. Is there a movement toward that in South Korea?
As a result of the field office?
Yeah, that's kind of encouraging that that's a good way to go. I mean, moving the mind.
Yeah, I hope so. I think COI, the introduction of the COI, as I was mentioning, already had that positive effect on particularly on the opposition, that maybe some of them felt maybe we should relent a little bit. I mean, COI, the UN is moving this direction, and we don't look good by continuing to oppose it, because we seem like a party that's going against the grains of the international sort of trend. So with the field office coming, and maybe more and more, I mean, to begin with, it's going to be a very small office. I think there's only going to be like 3 or 4 UN officers and maybe a couple of local hires. So maximum like 4, 5 or 6, including translator. So it's going to be a small office. But having said that, if that gets expanded and their role is established in Korea, I think it could have even further, positive spillover effect. North Korea is very, very sensitive about psychological aspect. That's why they're constantly threatening South Korea not to send these balloons, ad balloons with messages. We had to stop at the border, DMZ, these, what do you call those, speakers that sends loudspeakers that sends message to North Korea. Surprisingly, North Korea is very, very, very sensitive about that. They just don't like their people hearing about the real world out there because it's such a cocoon society. They know they're doing injustice. They know they're doing something bad, so they want to keep it at that cocoon. They don't want information seeping in. I should also point out that when the COI report, although the final report was given on March 17th this year, the actual contents was uploaded on the 17th of February, 1 month earlier. We should keep in mind that on the 14th of February, that's 3 days before the COI report got uploaded for public, North Korea, just out of nowhere, contacts South Korea and asks for, let's have family reunion, something that's been put off for like 3-4 years. And in what followed as the high-level official meeting, which was also first time in several years, they agreed to not only family reunion, but also not to get engaged in any sort of slander against each other. What does it all mean? Number one, they knew that COI report is coming out, right? So there's going to be a lot of criticism on North Korea. So they wanted to make sure that in South Korea, South Korean government does not say anything bad about North Korea. Number two, when the report came out on the 17th, unfortunately, South Korean media was all focused on the family reunion. So the COI report did not get the publicity that it deserved. That's why Michael Kirby was very disappointed that in Korea, the COI was like the number 5, number 6 issue. But the point is that North Korea is sensitive. Okay? It understands the power of COI and the international campaign and movements against this very clear wrongdoing that's going on in North Korea. That's why we must keep doing it.
Some in the back here. Yes.
Hi, I'm Jenna Gibson. I'm with Reporters Without Borders. And my question, I guess, is about something that you brought up, the lack of information, especially photographs and things like that. The fact that the outside world can't necessarily see what's going on and therefore, unfortunately, doesn't have this kind of resonance. And I guess my question is, thinking about, for example, the AP Bureau in Pyongyang that was established a few years ago, and tourists, you can still go into North Korea as a tourist and do these, maybe week-long trips and things like that. Is it worth it to do things like that and get even some information out, to get some photographs from North Korea? Or is that really just, you're only really seeing what the government wants you to see and it's doing more harm than good as far as the narrative that the outside world sees?
Yeah. Yesterday at the hearing, one of the testimonies were given by Shin Dong-hyuk, the escapee, the one who escaped the political prison camp. And he was actually, in the testimony, criticizing the tourists, American tourists, going into North Korea, that it only helps, I don't know how much they bring in, but it only helps to prop up the regime. I guess calling for the U.S. Congress or the U.S. government to maybe put a stop on this. I don't think, you will be able to go in on this sort of planned tour trip and be able to take the kind of picture that I would like to see that might be representative, that could really stick in our image. I think they will probably be showing a Pyongyang or North Korea. That's just surreal. It's not real North Korea. It's not the real people. So, I cannot stop tourists from going. We had the Kumgang Mountain tourism, which got stopped because they killed one of the tourist women who was taking stroll in the early morning, and somebody a soldier just shot her to death because she was outside the zone that she was supposed to be in. It hasn't resumed. I didn't go. A lot of people went. Actually, there was government subsidy to go on that trip. I didn't because I didn't want to add to any more money going into the Kim Jong-il coffers. That's my personal take.
You want to take one more question? Right there in the back.
I might add that I think, Greg, there's some improved satellite imagery that's continuously improving with satellite technology, and therefore we're probably going to have more and more clearer pictures of the concentration camps, political prison camps, with however small it may be, images of people as well. So that's the work of the North Korea Human Rights Committee. So hopefully we'll be able to get some images through satellites.
Peter Bigelow from Heritage. Are there separate national identities between the North Koreans and South Koreans that present any barriers to reunification? And if so, what steps can be taken ahead of time before the reunification happens that would maybe lower those barriers and make it easier to have a unified culture again?
Yeah, again, that's a very, very good question. Of course, there's huge barrier. It's a totally different world that we're living in. There was a recent satellite image of Korean Peninsula at night, and I think you probably saw it. It's pitch black in the north. It's bright shining in the south. Okay, it's just a very good image of our current address. North Korean refugees or defectors who come to South Korea, we now have about 26,500. It's not easy for these people getting adjusted. Of course, in the initial stages, it's the hunger, right? And freedom, maybe, but mostly hunger. They come down, they fill their stomach, but still they have to adjust to this new society. They're not used to that. So it takes a lot of effort, and quite a number of them try to get resettled elsewhere, Canada, England, so on and so forth. So that's a tough challenge. But what can we do? We're not like Yemen. Before Yemeni unification, that North and South Yemen, they actually used the same textbooks in schools. So in terms of this sort of like educational, cultural affinity, far more advanced than we were. So it's going to be a challenge. Even physical difference. Because of the malnourishment, physically, South Koreans are so much bigger. So that's a gap physically that we have to overcome. But it takes time. It's not going to, there's going to be growing pains, but I'm sure that once it does take place, we'll find a way to adjust.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, it's not you've painted a depressing picture, unfortunately, but that's the nature of this issue, and it's one that hopefully your speech here, your hearing yesterday before the U.S. Congress can shed light on it and hopefully provide some momentum to carry up on the COI report. So please join me in thanking Ambassador.